Joining us now on the Menard Studio Hotline, as he does each and every week, talk some college football. He is a college football featured writer for Bleacher Report, Brian Pedersen. Brian, as always, appreciate the time. Look forward to talking to you each and every week. Let's start with the announcement by Ohio State, Urban Meyer. He decides that after the first few weeks of the season, he's going to go with Cardale Jones over J.T. Barrett. Is that the right move for Ohio State and Urban Meyer?
I really don't know if it is the right move or not. I'm just glad that they're kind of making some decisions now. And if you see, it's been Jones all the way. He was throughout the spring, throughout the summer, and now with every game, he has been in front. So there's something about it, but during the games, Jones isn't doing necessarily what they want, so maybe they're trying to light a fire under him by replacing him with J.T. Barrett. It's a good problem to have, I guess, but the longer this goes, it can begin to become a real problem. Some uncertainty. There was some wonder about on last Saturday about whether Cardale had changed his Twitter information to list himself as a second-string quarterback after he'd been pulled for Barrett, and then he said that, no, that's been that way for a while. But you wonder if as the season goes on, if this is going to become an issue.
Well, you know, Urban Meyer is the king of manipulation, so to speak, to get the media to quiet down a little and that kind of stuff. After naming Cardale his starter, basically, then he makes a comment that says he's our guy unless he doesn't perform well. Well, isn't that where we were from the get-go? I mean, you know, Cardale has started all the games. J.T. Barrett's seen time in all the games. So basically, with that comment, has anything really changed?
No, I don't think so. I think he is a little disappointed that Jones hasn't performed as well. But some of our writers have piped in on this, that it's not just a quarterback thing, that this could be the offensive line has not looked good all the time. Hawaii was running some exotic blitzes and completely confused them. Even Northern Illinois was throwing them off a little bit with their rushes. But also, it's kind of held in the background that the impact that not having Tom Herman there calling plays has had. Ed Warner and Tim Beck, neither of them have the same kind of background or success that Herman had with doing that, so there's maybe not the same continuity. There's talk of maybe having one take over a little bit more of the play calling than the other one, and whether or not this is a system. And you've got an issue with two quarterbacks, but then you also have an issue with two coordinators, and if that's confusing. The other day I wrote a story about trades we'd love to see during the middle of college football season, if that were possible. And the one I came up with for Ohio State would actually have been trading Cardale to Alabama for Lane Kiffin. And especially with everything that's going on with rumors about him down there, maybe that would work great. Cardale could be Alabama's quarterback, so they don't have a problem anymore. And then Ohio State could have themselves a proven play caller without any controversy about that.
You mentioned Alabama and what the rumors that are swirling around. For people that don't know, because we haven't really talked much about it, I was going to wait to see if there was any validation to some of these stories. Explain what you mean by that with some of the rumors going around with Lane Kiffin down in Alabama right now.
And that's just what it is at this point. It's literally rumors about rumors about rumors. There are allegations that Lane Kiffin, the offensive coordinator, may or may not have had some sort of relations with either a booster or an assistant coach's spouse or even Nick Saban's daughter. I mean, there's so many different swirling things out there, and none of them have been substantiated in any way. The fact that this has come right after the first loss for Alabama is just a little too coincidental. It's kind of funny. They just gave up 43 points in this past game, but all the complaints have been about Alabama's offense when they were doing just fine, if not for some turnovers. I mean, 2 fumbles on kickoffs. You can't blame the offense for that. That's the guy who returned the kickoffs, fumbling those. And the quarterbacks made a couple bad throws. It's not so much that the play calling was bad in any way. And Nick Saban is a little bit more untouchable. Kiffin is almost like he's there to be the person who takes the brunt of the complaints. And so I don't know if it's circulating from that, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's gone after this year, but more because he's going to find himself a job somewhere else, possibly as a head coach.
Yeah, it's a weird story. Brian Pedersen, our guest, college football feature writer for Bleacher Report. It's Ford and O'Brien, ESPN Evansville 105.3 and online, ESPNEvansville.com. Well, let's stick with Alabama for a minute. You mentioned the loss to Ole Miss, and I've already seen headlines various outlets that are saying things like, is this the end of the Saban dynasty in Alabama? Are they in that much trouble, or is it just overreaction and maybe people that have been waiting for this day to come pouncing on the opportunity to say so?
It's a combination of the both. It's much more overreaction than anything else. It's the earliest Saban has lost a game in any of his seasons, so the panic is a little higher, and it's a program where anything short of a perfect record is looked at as that there are problems. As I said, there were turnovers. There were a couple freak plays on defense. Chad Kelly at Ole Miss throwing the ball essentially up in the air to avoid getting sacked, and it bounces around and gets into an Ole Miss player's hands and goes for a 60-yard touchdown. It's hard to defend against that. That's just a freak play. And then there was the pop pass, and Alabama seems to be falling victim to that more than anybody else the last few years, where they get tricked into the chasing the run and then gets thrown to somebody, and the issue about whether or not linemen are downfield. Alabama is hoping that they can get some further clarification on that kind of play here in the future. But, yeah, I mean, they're not perfect. Their defense is giving up more than you would have expected, considering how much talent they have on that side. And then on offense, it's really, really surprising that a school that 5 straight years has been the number one recruiting class doesn't have a bona fide quarterback. And you would think by this point that they would have made that a priority.
Well, let's stick with the SEC. Leonard Fournette made a name for himself. For those that weren't already familiar with his work, he certainly put himself on the national spotlight with that game against Auburn last week, and the way he was shedding tackles and back body dropping guys like a professional wrestler as he was chugging down the field. Is this a guy that is right now could be considered a front runner for the Heisman Trophy, or is it too early to tell?
I'd have to say that if you really had to put together a list now, it would be him, because I look at the Heisman as somewhat of an MVP type thing. It's not just the best player, but the one who means the most to his team. And if you took Fournette off of LSU, what do you have? They're afraid to throw the ball because they can't trust their quarterback. They have a good defense, but they wouldn't be able to do anything else without Fournette. And he has just been an absolute monster these past 2 games. And now this game coming up on Saturday at Syracuse, it's just the fact that you have LSU playing at upstate New York is a weird thing to begin with. But that has the potential for a game where there could be some craziness to it. I'm envisioning something like a Bo Jackson at Seattle, where he just breaks off some long run and keeps going up the tunnel in a dome, since we're talking about the Carrier Dome up there in Syracuse. If he can continue to put up good numbers, then the quarterback run we've seen at the Heisman is going to end. But he's also victim to LSU has to keep winning. He can't be on a team that's 8-4.
Brian Pedersen, our guest, college football featured writer for Bleacher Report. Ford and O'Brien, ESPN Evansville 105.3 and online, ESPNEvansville.com. Let's get over to your part of the country there, Brian. I know you're down in Arizona, so obviously you keep a good eye on what's going on there in the Pac-12. UCLA, number 9, taking on Arizona, number 16 this weekend. Of course, UCLA, the big story that they've lost their linebacker, Miles Jack, for the season. They've also had a couple other players defensively that have been banged up a little bit. Freshman quarterback in Josh Rosen, a team that has performed pretty well over the first few weeks of the season. Is this game this weekend a do-or-die kind of game for them? Do they have to win this game and maybe even run the table for a chance to win that conference? Or is it, if they lose this weekend, it's pretty much done?
No, I think there's still the opportunities. The Pac-12 has enough good teams that all play each other, that losing one isn't going to completely knock you out of the race. Last year when Arizona went up to Oregon and beat them, that did not preclude Oregon from being in the race. It was a bit shocking. But you have UCLA, Arizona, Utah, California are all still undefeated. Oregon has 1 loss. USC, ASU, Arizona State, they all have 1 loss, and they're all pretty much going to play each other. The bigger issue with the Pac-12 is that whether or not they can avoid not having someone with 2 or more losses as their champion, because of how strong the league is, similar to the SEC. This Saturday is an overall big day for the Pac-12, because 5 of its 6 ranked teams are playing against each other, and the 5th one of those is on the road. And then the other one, Stanford, is playing tonight in a very losable game at Oregon State. It's an opportunity for there to create some separation and have some of the better teams win, but it also could hurt the overall image if it's getting to that point where there's self-cannibalization.
You mentioned Stanford. They get a big win over USC last weekend. Does that make them the team to beat in the Pac-12, or is it still USC, Oregon, the normal names that you hear?
Well, it gives them a little bit of an advantage. At first, it takes away a lot of the sting from losing the opener to a Northwestern team that is a lot better than we thought they were, considering they're undefeated and have given up 16 points in 3 games. But that was probably their toughest remaining game in terms of location and opponent. If you look at Stanford's schedule, they play UCLA, they play Oregon, they play Arizona, all at home. They play Notre Dame at home. All of their remaining road games are against teams that were below 500 last year. So they have, if they can maintain this, they have the ability of the easiest route to an 11-1 regular season, and then if they were to win that out, then they would be in the discussion for a playoff because they would have beat so many of the good Pac-12 teams. They don't have that nice win early on in the season of the non-conference variety to help with that. No one in the Pac-12 does, actually. That's part of the knock. The Pac-12 has no quality wins at this point. But I am of the belief that the selection committee for the playoffs is going to do whatever it can to have 4 different conferences in the playoffs, and they would love to have the Big 10, the Pac-12, and the SEC are the 3 that I think are most important to get in there to be able to avoid having to expand to 8 in the future.
There's you mentioned a number of Pac-12 games against one another this weekend, and some ranked teams facing off later on Saturday evening. And you look at the afternoon games there on Sunday. You know, Notre Dame's taking on UMass, and Alabama plays Louisiana Monroe, and there's a couple of matchups there. Like during the day, it's like, there's not really anything for the casual fan to go, I'm going to watch that game. But I know TCU's playing, and they're taking on an unranked opponent. Outside of those games between the ranked opponents, is there one game that you're going to focus on maybe in the earlier part of the day that you're intrigued by?
Well, you had just touched on the TCU Texas Tech game. It's a dangerous game because Texas Tech is looking early on like the potential of being this year's TCU or this year's Auburn, a team that was really bad last year that's suddenly a lot better. Texas Tech was 4-8 last year, horrible on defense, and turned the ball over like there was no tomorrow. They're 3-0, and their first 2 wins are nothing to be excited about. But winning at Arkansas, even though Arkansas is not as good as we thought, was still impressive. They're taking care of the ball, and they move the ball really well. So with all the talk that the Big 12 was nothing was going to matter until November when Oklahoma and TCU and Baylor started to play each other, this is an important game early on since TCU has lost so many defensive starters. I think there's a possibility that they may have only one starter from January's Peach Bowl that is actually going to be playing in this game because of injuries and graduation. So that could be a big one. It's beyond that, it's a pretty light slate, but that's when we get some of our best ones. 2 weeks ago, who would have ever thought Jacksonville State Auburn was going to be a big deal? So the noon Eastern games tend to be where all the stinkers are, and there are some stinkers. Kansas playing Rutgers, that could end up being the worst college football game ever, or the way things work out, it might be one of the greatest we've ever seen.
That's Brian Pedersen, college football featured writer for Bleacher Report, joining us on the Menard Studio Hotline for his weekly discussion of all things college football. Brian, enjoy the games this weekend. We look forward to talking to you again next Friday, all right?
Thanks a lot, guys.